Ever since it was announced, fans have been speculating whether or not Metroid Prime 4 or Mario Kart 9 will be the launch title to go alongside Nintendo's new system. And with the April 2nd Nintendo Switch 2 Direct just 11 days away, I thought now was a good time to finally sit down and just talk about which game makes more sense as the launch title for the console. I know a lot of people have already decided that they think Mario Kart is going to be the launch title. It is what they showed the console with. A lot of others think Metroid Prime 4 could be that big game for launch day. There are also those still clinging on to hope that a new 3D Mario will manifest itself and become the launch title for this console. So that's what we're getting into today. If you are new here and you enjoy Nintendo Switch 2 content, theories, speculation, all that fun stuff, we are uploading daily until the Switch 2 Direct, and then from there, probably daily until the console comes out. So if you want to subscribe, I would really appreciate it. Let's get into it. Alrighty folks, welcome back to the channel. I hope your morning is going well. So originally, when I was planning out this video, I was just going to do a video on Metroid Prime 4 and how it could be a big breakthrough moment for the franchise, depending on how Nintendo positions it. But then I realized a video just on Prime 4 right now would inherently be about whether or not it's a launch title, so I figured I would phrase this as Mario Kart 9 versus Metroid Prime 4 as the launch title. And I do think this is kind of a tricky topic to tackle just 11 days before we get our answer at the Switch 2 Direct. I think there are plenty of valid reasons for or against either of these games to be the massive launch title for the console, the big one you're buying the console for on May 22nd or whenever the console does end up releasing. With that being said, while I did predict Metroid Prime 4 would be that game in a video a week or two ago, I do think that Mario Kart 9 has more going for it inherently just because it is a Mario game. It is going to sell so many copies. It is the game they announced the console with. By all accounts, Mario Kart 9 is clearly going to be the one. But I don't think it's quite that simple. I do think there is a lot of reason to think that Metroid Prime 4 could, or at the very least should, be a launch title for this console. I also do want to put out into the ether, and this would be incredible, this would be amazing, I want to manifest the potential of it being Metroid Prime 4 at launch, as well as Mario Kart 9, and whatever EPD4 is cooking up. That is the first thing we need to discuss, EPD4. Without a doubt, they're going to have a game. I guess there's a slim chance they don't, but when you look at past Nintendo console launch lineups, EPD4 is almost always there. So I wanted to go over Nintendo's launch history here and kind of just talk about the games that they published at release. We won't go over the NES because they launched with like 12 games or something like that. Every launch title was a Nintendo game. But starting with the SNES, we saw a pretty clear pattern of 2 or so first-party games from Nintendo. The SNES had Mario World as well as F-Zero and Pilot Wings, so 3 actually in that case. The N64 had Pilot Wing 64 and Mario 64. The GameCube had Luigi's Mansion as well as Wave Race Blue Storm. This is kind of crazy. I didn't know the Wii had so many more launch titles in Japan from a first party, but in North America, we had Wii Sports as well as Twilight Princess and Excite Truck, but the Wii in Japan launched a few weeks later on December 2nd with Wii Play as well as WarioWare Smooth Move. So there were actually 5 first-party Nintendo games on a launch day for Wii, at least in Japan, which is, I didn't know that until I was prepping this video. So that's a stacked lineup, even if some of those games are tech demos and kind of more, I don't know, not as high quality, I guess, as what we come to expect. Still a very stacked lineup from Nintendo first party there. The Wii U also a little weird in that Nintendo Land and New Super Mario Bros. U are the ones, like those are the big ones, but Nintendo did also publish Sing Party as well as Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge for some reason. For the Nintendo Switch, we had Breath of the Wild, of course, as well as 1-2 Switch, and on the eShop, Snipperclips was a digital launch title there. And just looking at some of the handhelds here, the GBA launched alongside Mario Advance as well as F-Zero Maximum Velocity. The Nintendo DS, similar to the Wii in Japan, had a few more in that region, but in North America, the launch titles were Metroid Prime Hunters, First Hunt, so not the full game, just the First Hunt demo, as well as Mario 64 DS. But in Japan, they also had Polarium, Pokemon Dash, and WarioWare Touched, so a way bigger launch lineup in Japan. And finally, for the Nintendo 3DS, it launched alongside all 3 versions of Nintendogs Plus Cats, Steel Diver, and Pilot Wings Resort. The reason I wanted to go over that, one, fun little history lesson, but two, just to demonstrate that Nintendo, at least for the past 3 consoles, has been pretty consistent in one major, more core title, be that your Twilight Princess, your New Super Mario Bros. Wii, or your Breath of the Wild, alongside an EPD4 developed casual game, be that Wii Sports, Nintendo Land, or 1-2 Switch. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're locked to just doing 2. In all 3 of those cases, actually, there were more than 2 Nintendo-published games on launch day. In fact, the only consoles that I can see, at least in terms of home consoles, that only had 2 launch titles were the N64 and a GameCube, at least in terms of first party. So generally speaking, we get like 2 to 4 launch titles from Nintendo. Sometimes they're published games that they didn't actually develop, but that's a whole nother thing. So bare minimum 2, right? I think we're all in agreement we're getting 2. One of them, very likely an EPD4 game. Like I mentioned, maybe that doesn't happen this time around, but considering we've had it for 3 consoles in a row, and considering the Switch 2 has this mouse con functionality where you can use it like a computer mouse, that just screams EPD4. I would be very surprised if they didn't have some sort of weird gimmick game for that on launch day. So one of them, I assume, will be that, whatever that new IP gimmick game is, alongside one of either Metroid Prime 4, Mario Kart 9, or maybe 3D Mario. We'll toss that in here as well, because if you notice a pattern with all of their launch lineups, they always launch with either a Mario game, or Luigi's Mansion if you count that as a Mario game for GameCube, I would say that counts, or a Zelda game. The major exception to this was the 3DS, which had a very rocky launch because it had Nintendogs and Steel Divers and Pilot Wings, which, to be fair, 3 Nintendo consoles launched with Pilot Wings. That's actually it's almost a pattern. Maybe we're getting a new Pilot Wings on this console. But yeah, Zelda or Mario. I think we're all in agreement Zelda's not gonna pop up out of nowhere and be a launch title for this console. We just got Tears of the Kingdom and Echoes of Wisdom. So it stands to reason, based on past history with their launch lineups, Mario Kart 9 or 3D Mario make the most sense. However, I do think that beyond just the history, looking beyond their patterns and all that, Metroid Prime 4 makes so much sense to launch with this console, which is not something I was saying a year ago. I used to be very anti Metroid Prime 4 Switch 2 launch title for a long time. I didn't even think it would be cross-gen. I think the fact that we haven't seen it at this point really does indicate it will be at the Switch 2 Direct, and we'll see it there, and it'll get dated there, and all that. I know it might be kind of beating a dead horse at this point, but there's been a lot of talk for years now that Metroid Prime 4, if positioned as a launch game for the Switch 2, could potentially have a Breath of the Wild moment, and that it could hopefully breathe a new life into Metroid. Now, obviously, Zelda has always sold better than Metroid, even Skyward Sword, which is one of the lowest selling 3D Zelda games. At that time, Zelda needed some new breath put into it, and that's when we got Breath of the Wild. It became a huge smash hit success. It carried the Nintendo Switch at launch, and it really exploded that franchise into new popularity, unlike I ever really thought was possible. Metroid has never been as popular as Zelda. It's never been even close to as popular as even some of the least popular Zelda games, but that doesn't mean it couldn't become that. Now, I'm not saying Metroid Prime 4 being a launch game would mean, oh, it's gonna magically sell 30 million copies. I do think it would sincerely help it, though, which I think is a big point for it being a launch title. Nintendo and Retro have been working on this game for the entirety of the Nintendo Switch generation. It was announced in 2017. They announced 2 years later in 2019 that Retro Studios had taken over development. They never said the actual developer originally, but we know it was Bandai Namco Singapore. So Retro Studios has been working on this game for 6 to 7 years, and considering they are located in Austin, Texas, where game development costs are a lot higher because of cost of living in America and all that, there is a good, very real possibility that Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is the most expensive game Nintendo has ever developed, even more than Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. With how much Nintendo has invested in Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, it stands to reason that they want to make as much money as possible off of it, and making it a launch game would certainly help with that. It's also a series similar to Pikmin that, although it's never been a massive smash hit, it is something that Nintendo has always kind of kept trying to push. There was that period from 2010 to 2016 where they weren't doing too much there. But if you think about it, I mean, Metroid is one of the only franchises from the NES outside of like the big dogs that is still going and is still consistently getting games. We had Metroid Dread a few years ago, lots of remasters. During the early 2000s, they were going crazy with all the Prime games, the spin-offs, the 2D games. Like, Metroid, despite its sales being pretty low, has always been something Nintendo has really tried to push, and considering Metroid Prime 4 is likely their most expensive game of all time, I feel like now is the time to really push a Metroid game and try to catapult the series to a new success level. And a very, very easy thing they could do to help Metroid Prime 4 get more people talking about it and get more sales is make it a launch title. Maybe that's alongside Mario Kart, as I mentioned earlier, but what I think would really, really help this game is if Metroid Prime 4 comes out, let's say the console releases in May. You have that on launch day alongside a casual, family-friendly EPD4 mouse con gimmick game on launch day. Then, like a month or so later, you still get Mario Kart. The Switch 2, I think, is probably the most anticipated console launch of all time, coming off of the Switch, which is Nintendo's best-selling console, or will very soon pass the Nintendo DS. It's going to sell out regardless. I know people will say, well, Mario Kart's a system seller, they want to have that system seller there on launch day, but it doesn't matter. It's going to sell out regardless, because everybody, for one, is going to want to buy the console just to prepare for everything else coming later. But if Mario Kart is even just 6 weeks after release, they will buy the console on launch day, they'll see, oh, well, Mario Kart's not out for a few more weeks, and then they'll buy Metroid Prime 4. Now, we don't know the exact shipment numbers that Nintendo will have for this console at release, but I'm not joking when I say making Metroid Prime 4 not only a Switch 2 game, which, once again, I think is a given at this point considering we haven't seen it, but also making it a launch title. I'm not joking when I say it will be the difference of like 3 to 5 million sales bare minimum for this game, especially if it actually does hit, which I have no doubt it will, reviews very well, maybe it's a Game of the Year contender. Having that be your big launch title, and then Mario Kart a few weeks later, maybe 2 months later, then you have 3D Mario and the holiday, it is just such a bulletproof strategy, because you don't need to waste Mario Karts immediately. They showed it in the reveal trailer, there is no denying that, and there's also no denying the precedent for other Nintendo launch lineups. There's usually a Mario or Zelda game, so launching with Metroid Prime 4 is a bold strategy, but it's a bold strategy I think Nintendo can really afford to do this time around, because even if there were no launch games, and Mario Kart was dated for a month after the console releases, the console would still sell out, even if there was no games to buy, just because of backwards compatibility and people being excited for new Nintendo hardware. So in my opinion, Nintendo has everything to gain and really nothing to lose by making Metroid Prime 4 Beyond a launch title for this console. Maybe it doesn't pan out. Maybe Metroid Prime 4 Beyond only sells 2 to 4 million as expected of a new Metroid Prime game. But I really think if it is there on day one, we could be looking at a Metroid Prime game that over time, 5 years into the Switch 2's life cycle, is a 10 million plus seller, maybe even more than that optimistically. Mario Kart doesn't need to be a launch title. It doesn't even really need to be a year one title. Nintendo's coming out swinging with that thing, but if the Switch 2 lifecycle lasts anywhere near as long as the Switch 1 lifecycle has, Mario Kart 9's safe for 50 million sales. It doesn't need to be a launch title. The Switch needed Breath of the Wild. It needed that big game, that critical darling at release, because they were coming off of the Wii U, and the Wii U launch lineup was Nintendo Land and another new Super Mario Bros. Game. Nintendo's in a very different position where not only do they have Mario Kart lined up and ready, but they also have Metroid Prime 4 and likely a 3D Mario. EPD5 could very well be near completion on the next Animal Crossing or Splatoon game. They have all their ducks lined up. So if you start with Metroid Prime 4, then you go to Mario Kart, then you go to whatever else, 3D Mario, Splatoon, whatever, it's just such a recipe for success, at least in my opinion. And I'm sure people will comment, well, Metroid Prime 4 is a Switch 1 game, it's kind of lame to launch with a game that's not only on the other platform, but also that Switch 1 Metroid Prime 4 cartridge would be playable on the Switch 2. But to be fair, they have definitely done that before with Twilight Princess, although the GameCube version came out a little bit later, they delayed that version, as well as Breath of the Wild being, you know, one of the biggest Nintendo launch titles of all time. And actually, thinking about 2017 Nintendo, what came out after launch? It was Mario Kart. It was a Wii U port of Mario Kart, but it was Mario Kart. They did launch that game a little bit after release, after that big single-player epic, you know, won fans over and was a critical darling. So I don't know, man. I can definitely acknowledge the history here and them almost always launching with a Mario game or a Zelda game, but they've never launched with a Mario Kart game. That's never happened. So actually, even though First Hunt is a demo, there's actually more history for Metroid Prime launching with a console than Mario Kart. There it is, folks. I solved it. It's definitely going to be Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. No, I'm joking, but I can see the arguments for Mario Kart. It does make a lot of sense if they just want to, go all out and make sure there is no room for any mistake whatsoever. Then yeah, Mario Kart there at launch is a great idea, and even still, having Metroid Prime 4 Beyond a few months later, the game's still going to do better than any other Metroid game. I have no doubt about that. I just feel like it would be such a moment, it'd be such a moment for Metroid Prime 4 to be that launch title. I know Metroid isn't as big in Japan, which is why I do want to once again say I think there is a potential here for all three. We get that EPD4 game that we come to expect from Nintendo console launches. We get Mario Kart, which is the online multiplayer game of the lineup. And then you have Metroid Prime 4, which is the single-player game. And listen, I'll just say it right now, I don't even like Metroid Prime like that, like a lot of people do. I think 2D Metroid is a lot better. That's just my opinion. I respect Metroid Prime. I'm way more excited for Mario Karts. However, launching a new console with like a multiplayer-focused game does feel a little weird, doesn't it? Like, you look at every other Nintendo launch lineup, and they all have that big single-player game. I do also feel like, based on what we saw of Mario Kart in that reveal trailer, it doesn't look graphically, like, insane or anything. It looks good. It looks solid. I'm sure the impressive aspect of it will be how big the tracks are, the 24-player races, all that. They're using the power of the Switch 2 in a different way than just it looks a lot better. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is a very good-looking game. Based on what we saw of that, I definitely think that looks better than Mario Kart 9 does from the little glimpses we saw of the off-screen gameplay on the Switch 2. So if you want to have a graphical showcase from first party on release day that really shows like, yeah, it's a Switch, but it's a next-gen Switch. It looks a lot better. Having a side-by-side comparison of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond on Switch and also Switch 2 on release day, or even in the April 2nd Switch 2 Direct, would be a great way of showing people like, hey, look how much better this looks. I'm not even expecting Metroid Prime 4 Beyond to look that much better, to be honest, but maybe Retro did go hard on making the Switch 2 version look really pretty. And if so, I do think that would be a better graphical showcase than Mario Kart. But really, once again, to be fair, Nintendo doesn't really ever like go hard on like, oh, this is how next gen this is. This looks so amazing. Nintendo doesn't really focus on that. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. What do you think the launch title will be? Mario Kart 9 or Metroid Prime 4 Beyond? I can see the argument for both. I definitely think Nintendo should launch with Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, given that the console will sell out regardless, and then you have Mario Kart a little bit later, but I can see why Mario Kart 9 kind of does make more sense, so I am very conflicted on this. What would be a real subversion is, what if it launched with 3D Mario, you get Metroid Prime 4 over the summer, and then you have Mario Kart as your big holiday game? That would actually be kind of funny. That ended up being the scenario here, but considering we saw Mario Kart, I do think that will come first before 3D Mario, even if it's not at launch. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Which game do you think will be the launch title for the Switch 2? Of course, subscribe here for more Switch 2 content, theories, discussion, all that fun stuff. Follow me on Twitter at BoTalksGames, and follow my other channel at It's Amiibo. As always, you can watch another video here, listen to me ramble about more Nintendo stuff, and until next time, folks, peace!